Oh gosh, when I was about 6 years old, my dad taught me some basic guitar chords. I'm 36 right now, by the way. And, he also taught me some basic drum beats. And, I did that for a little while, kind of lost interest. Then when I was 12, music just became my passion. So I took up guitar again, very seriously. Was also playing drums as well. And, like most people, I had a high school band and we sucked really bad. And then after high school, I moved away from home. I had several bands over the years, one including an Iron Maiden tribute band, a couple of local Phoenix bands, and then in 2014, I moved up to Las Vegas to actually be the music director for an Elvis-based show that was being put together. And after working on that for about 5 months straight, the whole thing fell apart before it could even take off. So at that point, I was just mostly trying to find work to, pay the bills and survive. Did a couple other, small bands in the Las Vegas area. And then I just decided to focus solely on writing and recording my own music and then get my own band together. And then this opportunity came, so I thought this would be a great opportunity to add to my resume and gain some more experience and hopefully, take a step in the next right direction for everything.
This is Joe Prunera. He's a guitar player that lives in Las Vegas, who just a few months ago received an email that would change his life forever. The email was from an artist manager looking to audition Joe for an up-and-coming hard rock band. In the following audio, Joe will describe how that process unfolded and how he ended up becoming the rhythm guitarist for a band named Threatin.
Back in probably about early to mid-July, I got a Facebook message from a woman named Lisa Golding who was with Aligned Artist Management saying that they had just signed a hard rock artist and was looking for a rhythm guitar player for their upcoming European tour. And she saw some videos of mine online and thought I would be a good fit. So wanted to know if I wanted to come down and do an audition. So I immediately called her up and, got some details on who the artist was and, I was asking every minute detail, I could for the tour, dates, how much it pays, what would be included, and everything like that. And some of the information she didn't know. So, she had me email, the company and, email a guy named Joe Abrams who would know more about those details. So I did, and he replied back, and that's when he told me that it was going to be, these dates in November. It would be a $300 flat fee paid up front for the whole tour. All expenses would be paid, and he gave me 2 songs to learn for the audition, which was about a week and a half from that point. So I ended up learning 7 of his songs. And I went down to Hollywood to do the audition, and there were, I think, 2 other people after me that day. And then he called me up within a couple hours of the audition and invited me out to dinner and basically offered me the position and right then and there. And so I accepted and thought, this would be good. At the time, my first impression was he was a really nice guy, very down to earth, somebody I really got along with. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity. And so I went back down to Southern California for the next 2 weekends. One was to do a guitar rehearsal with just him and I, and then the weekend after was going to be our first full band rehearsal. And then after that, it was every other weekend we would all meet up at his place. We'd come down on a Friday, work through a couple of things, maybe learn one of the new songs, and then Saturday would be full band rehearsals. We go through the set probably at least 3 or 4 times, maybe sometimes as much as 6. And then did that for the next few months. The last week in October, we met up down to his house for a week long of rehearsals. And we'd run through the set probably at least 3 or 4 times every single day. And, and then about halfway through the week, we got the itineraries and travel information and all that stuff. And then the day, 1, maybe 2 days before we flew out, we learned that the $300 flat fee that we were going to be compensated for the tour was actually to be used for us to eat for food over there. And it didn't really settle well with us, but we thought, all right, we'll deal with it. And we were also told that all the travel expenses and baggage would be paid for. That turned into my carry-on suitcase being just about 2 inches too big to fit in the overhead compartment, so I ended up having to check that at the last minute, and I had to pay the $100 fee out of my own pocket for that. So yeah, that's basically the nutshell of how I came to be with the whole experience.
As the story continued to develop, Joe Prunera would come to realize that he had been an unwilling participant to one of the most bizarre stories of the last few years. A hoax so ridiculous, so outlandish, that it has attracted attention from every corner of the globe. According to information provided by a now-deleted Wikipedia page, we can surmise that the man known as Jered Threatin was born on September 11th, 1989. He started playing guitar at the age of 10, and then moved on to other instruments, such as piano, bass guitar, and drums, at the age of 13. He claims to have never received any musical lessons, self-teaching himself everything. Jered then began playing on stage at the age of 14, beginning a lifelong obsession with fame and entertainment. Between the beginning of his teenage years and his early adulthood, not much was documented online. Jered claimed to have gone to college and obtained a degree in psychology, before again turning his attention to music. In 2012, when he was around 23 years old, he moved from the Midwest to Los Angeles, where he started rekindling his musical dreams. In California, the persona that was Jered Threatin started to become an actuality. Following his move to Los Angeles, the band Threatin was formed, with Jered being the sole member. This is when he began operating under the pseudonym of Jered Threatin, and began laying a trail of breadcrumbs that web sleuths would try to untangle years later. Jered claims to have signed a recording contract with a label called Superlative Music Recordings, which is ironic because no such record label actually exists. This record contract, according to information Jered himself has pushed online, was for multiple albums, but as we can now determine, this Superlative Music Recordings was a sham of an organization. More on that later. Jered then claims that Threatin began touring across North America, but there is no record of this actually happening. Following this alleged North American tour, Jered entered the studio to record his debut album, even though much of the corroborating information is unverified and, likely, false. He claims to have entered Mindframe Studios, a Los Angeles recording studio, to record the album. But a surface-level investigation will show that Mindframe Studios, if it does exist, has very little presence in the rest of the music industry. Mindframe Studios was likely just his bedroom. Its Facebook page has 2 likes and features nothing but stock images. In fact, no other musical artist has ever claimed to use Mindframe Studios. But the creation of its Facebook page, in June of 2017, happens to coincide with another important date in Threatin's career trajectory.
I lie awake at night, just buried in my mind. I feel it burn inside. The will is gone, the will to carry on. Will to carry on.
On June 16th, 2017, Threatin released its debut single, titled Living is Dying. This was followed up the next month by a second single, titled Identity. Interesting enough, Jared explained the reasoning behind the title Identity, which, I believe, would become pertinent to the story later on. Quote, "With a title like Identity, I felt like there would be an inherent expectation from the audience or me to describe myself, or how I perceive my own identity. Lyrically, I thought it would be compelling to write about all the things I am not, rather than expressing what I feel I am." Following these two singles, which received a very mild response from the already oversaturated music markets, Threatin released its debut album, titled Breaking the World. In a rather impressive feat, Jared had actually recorded all of the instruments and the vocals himself, but the end result was a rather uninspired mix of hard rock and singer-songwriter ballads that paid homage back to the glam metal phase of the 1980s, with a decent splash of teenage angst thrown in for good measure. To make matters worse, Jared seemed to have crafted a persona that took himself and his music much too seriously. The music itself wasn't god-awful, but the attitude behind it seems almost insufferable. In a very pretentious quote from his now-defunct Wikipedia page, he described the writing process for this album. Quote, "When I began writing the album, I tried to think of each song as a doorway to a musical direction that I could continue to explore in the future. Knowing it was my debut album, I consciously tried to break down any barriers that could restrict my creativity moving forward." By the end of the year, Jared's musical dream seemed to be dead on arrival. The album, Breaking the World, had ironically not quite done what its title inspired. Jared's goofy Tommy Wiseau-esque music videos had a few hundred views in the several months after their release, and the numbers weren't too impressive on streaming services either, with the number of total listens numbering in the mere dozens. Despite this, however, Threatin was awarded the 2017 Artist of the Year award by Top Rock Press, an online publication. While that does sound impressive, the shine seems to fade away when you think about the publication itself. Top Rock Press. Have you actually ever heard of that website before now? Likely not. That's because it was a website that had been created for the sole purpose of giving validity to the band Threatin. Over the next year, Jered Threatin, and/or people associated with him, began pushing the band's music on a number of false social media accounts. Many of Threatin's followers on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter seem to be located in developing countries, where click farms are hired to support internet ventures. In addition to paying for fake followers on social media, a number of websites were created to add validity to the music of Threatin. These websites include the aforementioned Top Rock Press, but also extend to nymusicreview.com and celebritymusicscene.com, where Jared gave text-only interviews with reporters whose work is not published anywhere else. Perhaps the most egregious of these online aberrations was the Wikipedia page for Jered Threatin, created with the sole purpose of turning Jared into a pseudo-celebrity. The page even included a paparazzi-esque photo of Jared walking outside a business, which looked like it was shot with a cell phone camera, and compared his music to not only Metallica and Guns N' Roses, but Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles. This Wikipedia page, which was moderated heavily, even included a public image and stage persona section, which read as follows. Threatin is known for his long hair, all-black attire, and outspoken demeanor. He regularly performs and appears publicly in all-black clothing and has never been photographed wearing any color. His attire typically consists of solid black twill pants, boots, t-shirt, and often a leather jacket or hooded garment. He has been quoted as saying, "There is no stage persona. What you see on stage is who I am all the time. If people think it's a character, then I guess I'm a character all the time." Shocking absolutely nobody, the Wikipedia page used Threatin's own website as its primary source, as well as the handful of websites set up by Jared to add validity to this persona. In March of 2018, just weeks after the creation of this Wikipedia page, it was deleted, with a moderator noting, quote, "Article looks pretty, but on examination the sources are all primary, user-generated, or fake." Despite all of the work done by Jered Threatin to spread the word of his music, it seemed to have done very little good. Most of his social media followers were still fake and paid for clicks from overseas, and his music received very little fanfare. That was not going to deter Jered, however. He began to make preparations for a European headlining tour, which would take place in the fall of 2018. In the summer, 10 dates were announced, which would start on November 1st and wrap up on November 16th, taking him and his band through the UK, Scotland, Ireland, France, Italy, and Germany. Throughout 2018, Jered began working on making his European headlining tour a reality. First and foremost, he enlisted the help of 3 musicians: guitarist Joe Prunera, bassist Gavin Carney, and drummer Dane Davis. You heard from Joe in the introduction of this episode. All 3 were contacted by artist managers at a company called Aligned Artist Management. As you can guess, this was another falsehood perpetuated by Jered, but more on that later. With his band set, Jered began making accommodations for the trip with Kelsey, his quote-unquote tour manager. I use that term loosely because Kelsey also happens to be Jered's wife, who, as far as I know, has no tour management experience. The band members hired to perform with Jered were promised an all-expenses-paid tour of Europe with a $300 stipend. Not a bad way to see Europe, if you ask me. However, the day before flying out, after months of auditions and rehearsals, the band members were informed that the $300 was supposed to pay for their food, which, if you've ever been to Europe, you know will not get you far when you're eating mostly in restaurants, especially, as has been noted, after the conversion rates take their toll. The European tour kicked off on November 1st, 2018, at the Underworld venue in the Camden district of London. Without going into much detail, the show was a colossal disappointment. A follow-up comment on Threatin's Facebook page, made by the Underworld Camden's Facebook account, read, quote, "What happened to the 291 advanced ticket sales your agent said you'd sold? 3 people turned up. Please don't lie about ticket sales, and please don't contact us again for a show." The same behavior showed itself over the next couple of tour dates, which took Threatin to Trillions in Newcastle, and then on to Ivory Blacks in Glasgow. In each of these shows, close to 0 people showed up to support Threatin, with the lone attendees being staff members of the venue, guests of the opening band, or the opening bands themselves.
We were told by Jered before we left the States that all the venues were going to, seat between 1,000 and 1,500 people, and that the label wanted, him to get used to playing on those kinds of size stages and venues, and, have, each country get used to seeing him on those size stages. And the first show in London was at the Underworld in Camden, and as soon as you walk into the back of the stage, it was very, very clear that this was not going to be the case. It's a great venue, great sound, great people that work there, but it was certainly not capable of holding 1,000 to 1,500 people. And so we thought, okay, whatever, we weren't really thinking too much of that. And then, we get in, do a sound check, and then the first band goes on, and then the second band goes on, and, you're looking out and nobody's in the crowd during each set. And then we go on, and, I counted 7 people in the audience, and most of those people were from the opening band. And so I said, okay, I wasn't too concerned. I had some really bad jet lag, and it was also our first show together as a band. So naturally there's going to be a few little mishaps, and, it's good to get, I thought it was, all right, good. No, not many people here. We can get through this first show and everything will be fine. So I showed up to the second venue, and it's the same thing. There's nobody there. I counted another 7 people in the audience, and most of them were from the first band. And like I actually had spoken with one of the workers from the first venue, as well as the sound guy from the second venue, and they both said this is very strange. He said, we always have a crowd here, no matter what night of the week. And, we haven't seen anything like this, almost ever. So at that point, we kind of thought to ourselves, all right, this is probably going to be the case for the rest of the tour. Maybe it's a bad promoter. Maybe the promoter who was based in LA didn't do their job properly or something. And after the second show, we stopped seeing posters for for his shows. So there wasn't any advertising for the shows other than maybe a listing on, the show's, message board or something. And, again, there's just basically nobody there. We were playing to practically, an empty room. Maybe between like 3 and 7 people on average.
At this point, you may be asking yourself how a band can play a tour to absolutely no one. Well, let me explain it a little bit. Oftentimes, venues will reach out to artists and try to arrange for shows to happen there. In that case, the venue takes the brunt of the promotion and marketing, because the ticket sales affect their bottom line. However, in other cases, venues will be contacted by promoters, who offer to essentially rent out the venue for a night or two. That is what happened here. The venues in question, as well as the opening bands scheduled to play in front of Threatin, were contacted by a promoter named Casey Marshall, who claimed to work for a company called Stage Right Bookings. At the surface, this seemed legit. Both had had some kind of web presence and were just looking to rent out the venues for an evening. This meant that they, the promoter, would pay an upfront fee to rent the building for the show. In all of these cases, this wasn't terrible. The venues received their fees and scheduled the shows, but could not anticipate nobody showing up to the shows. They had paid for bartenders and security to be present, but now had to swallow those costs because Threatin had not fulfilled their end of the bargain, which was mainly promoting the event and selling tickets. This is how you end up with a tour that nobody pays to see. On November 6th, 2018, the Threatin European tour continued on into Bristol. That night, they were playing at the Exchange, alongside 2 opening bands, Camino and Ghost of Machines. Instead of trying to tell you their experiences, I'll just play what they told me. Here's frontman Ed Taylor of the Bristol-based Camino.
So it basically came from an email. So an email dropped into our inbox one day, and it was addressed from a name which has become, I think, quite notorious as the story has gone on, which is Casey Marshall of Stage Right Bookings. You get a lot of emails as a band when you're booking gigs and things like that, and in various formats asking for shows. And the initial email that we actually got was very simplistic, really, and all it asked was basically, would you guys like to play a show in your hometown? So, we're the kind of band that likes to do that. I'm sure most bands would probably explore the opportunity to play a show, and particularly as our drummer Chris is actually off travelling for a year at the moment, and we're working with our friend Mark. He's standing in for Chris for this year, so it's a little bit of experience for him, sort of on the gig circuit and that. So I got back to that email and said, hey Casey, we'd love to play. Fire over some more details and that kind of thing. It was in the second email that I would say the cracks started to show. I mean, we didn't really kind of think too much of it at the time other than to take it with a pinch of salt. But it was in the second email where we read the line that said something about you'll have the opportunity to meet loads of industry people and all that kind of thing. And as I say, having been sort of playing in bands for kind of 10 years, you get to the point where you kind of grow out of that and you think, how much of that is real kind of thing. But you sort of nevertheless, we wanted to play the gig. So that's really how it came about. We accepted the gig from there, and that was a good few months before the gig, and up until sort of closer, we didn't really hear much from Casey, to be honest. That was kind of how it came about. We arrived at the venue for sound check, and we're good friends with the guys in Ghost of Machines, who are the other support band. I think they arrived around the same time as us, so we loaded the gear in. We're having a chat to them. And the first thing that I did on walking into the venue was I was introduced to a lady called Kelsey, whose name has also sort of done the rounds since the story broke. But she introduced herself as Threatin's tour manager, said hello. And that was about it, really. She said a quick hello. She gave me a copy of a PRS form for filling out the sort of the song rights and things like that to claim back the royalties for sort of playing live. That was about the level of communication we kind of had at that point. I didn't actually see Threatin himself at all until he played, until he hit the stage. But rewinding back a bit to sort of to our sort of set, I know that the night manager for the Exchange had a chat with Kelsey. Everything seemed to be going okay. There was a sound check, and everything sort of went well in that respect. We played our set. We had a great time, as we do, but it was becoming sort of more and more apparent the more that time went on that obviously something wasn't quite right. And we'll probably touch on this at a later stage, I'm sure, but we had our sort of feelings and our thoughts before the gig took place that maybe there were a few things that weren't quite sort of 100% legit about it, but we thought, you know what, we'll go ahead. Ghost of Machines then played their set, which was great, but again, we played our set to Ghost of Machines, a couple of their fans and a couple of our fans, and Ghost of Machines played their set to us and their fans and our fans. So nobody's come into the venue at this point, and obviously Ghost of Machines probably started their set just before 9 o'clock. So you're thinking for a music venue, it's a little bit odd. There's some things that are definitely up here. No sign of anybody from Threatin, none of the band. As far as I'm aware, they're sort of cooped up in the dressing room upstairs. And during Ghost of Machines set, a couple of our guys went out to the bar, and they had a chat with the Exchange night manager, a few of the bar staff. And it was at that point that we found out that actually the venue had been told 170 tickets had been sold for the gig. And that they'd sort of done a little bit of digging afterwards after realising, okay, obviously, clearly this isn't going ahead. And they noticed that when you look on the event, all the likes are from these accounts sort of elsewhere. It all looks very much like it's been paid for. So it kind of really hit home then. And the more that the night went on, these little sort of cracks started to appear, things in the story. It got to the point where Threatin was due to go on. His bands were doing quite a bit of setting up. They brought 2 huge banners and a smoke machine with them as well, and essentially played to a pretty much empty room. We did stick around while loading out and sort of caught parts of it, but essentially he was playing to the bands kind of going in and out of the room, and Kelsey, his tour manager. And that was that, really. That was the night. It was, as I say, it was quite surreal. It was kind of amusing, kind of frustrating at the same time. There was a lot still to be revealed, and a lot that we sort of got our teeth into over the coming sort of couple of days afterwards, sort of looking into the kind of deeper end of it. We got home and we dived into Instagram. We looked at the other things that had happened on his tour. Rewinding a couple of days before the gig, myself and Paul, our guitarist, actually sat and we were having a chat about it, and we looked through his social media. And it was at that point that we discovered that there were a lot of likes on his Facebook, on his YouTube video, things like that, and not a whole lot of interaction. 38,000 odd likes on Facebook, but 1 or 2 likes per post kind of thing. And you're thinking there's something definitely up here. He definitely pays for something to get these numbers. But going back to where we were after the gig, we started to dig a little bit more. I think the first revelation we made about an hour after the show was that Kelsey, the tour manager, was actually his wife. Which, I mean, you could say it isn't a problem, but it started to add to this story of actually these kind of industry people that he's claiming to have, maybe they're not quite 100% real or sort of what everybody would think. So I think a couple of days after that, we were still talking about it, and we had a band meeting. And it's funny, we were actually due to talk about the progress for our EP, our next music videos and things like that. And we got completely sidetracked by Threatin, as you say, as everybody has over the past week. And the meeting took a turn basically down the rabbit hole, where the three of us, myself, Paul, Dan, our bass player, started sort of looking at Threatin's social media, looking at his website, and it wasn't long before we'd really kind of unraveled this ball of wool that was the sort of story of Threatin. And this is all of the kind of content that came out a day later. We found sort of some of the fake names that had been sort of mentioned quite a lot on his socials. We found that the websites for all of the sort of industry contacts that he claimed to be working with were all sort of owned by the same GoDaddy account, and they're all kind of linking to this one sort of holding Wix page and that kind of thing. So we started to really unravel it at that stage. And it's quite an amazing process, really, because the more that we got into it, the more that we found, and you find yourself going, oh wow, look what I've found. And it got to the point where we were looking through his tour dates as well, and we were going back. It's quite funny, it sort of takes 10 minutes at a time, scrolling back through past Facebook events on venues to just try and find any sort of record of him playing the gigs that he'd claimed to have played before in the US and in Europe as well. And the majority of them clashed with something or didn't exist. So, as I say, the more we got into this, the deeper and deeper it got. And then, of course, 24 hours later, the story hits the mainstream news. But yeah, it was the night before, really, where we started to make the kind of true realizations about what was going on.
The day after the show, the Facebook account for The Exchange posted an explanation of the prior night's event, which had left them absolutely gobsmacked. Quote, "Last night at The Exchange, a band from LA called Threatin played. We were expecting it to be a busy night because the promoter had supposedly sold 180 tickets. It was a bit weird to find out the promoter was still in Hollywood instead of being at the gig. Slightly weirder that we hadn't sold any tickets through the venue at all. It really seemed weird when the only people to arrive were on the support band's guest list. We had to ask Threatin to pay the venue hire and staff costs before anyone else played. The singer eventually huffed off and withdrew the money so the show could continue, and they could play to literally 0 people, aside from their tour manager and a couple of guys from one of the support bands because they felt bad for this guy. Turns out, Threatin are essentially a fake band. 38,000 likes on Facebook, which have all been paid for. The 100 or so people attending the event page, and all the other event pages for their tour, are all based in Brazil. Every comment on their YouTube videos is phony, including ones about how the women posting want to lick sweat off his body. I'm starting to think they probably didn't win Top Rock Artist of the Year award like their bios suggest. On November 8th, 2018, the tour continued, with the backing band members growing more and more wary that they had become a part of something odd. That night, they played another show at the Asylum, a venue in Birmingham, and again, no one showed up. The Asylum would later state, through social media, that Threatin and their promoter had claimed to have sold at least 150 tickets to Asylum's small room. Despite that claim, however, it was noted that they had sold only one ticket in total. Only 13 people were in attendance. A sound engineer that worked at the venue, a bartender, 10 people that were guest listed by the opening band, and the single lone ticket buyer, Adam Gostick, a member of the opening band, The Unresolved, which is a bitchin' name by the way, began communicating with the website Metal Sucks about how they had been approached by the promoter of the show. When paired together with the social media post made by the duped venues, was enough to create suspicions that this was all a big hoax. It was at around this point that the charade began to fall down around Jered Threatin and his wife, Kelsey. Because he had paid for the venues to host their performances, the venues had not really looked into his musical history or his web presence. However, this began to change when the venues realized that their staff were losing out on earnings from the nights in question, since the take from bars and concessions was close to zero, and the performers themselves were losing out. Some of the opening bands had paid out of pocket to attend the events, with some openers losing hundreds of dollars in transportation cost. Those of you that have had to lug around musical equipment will know how aggravating it can be, especially for long distances. In addition, these musicians had juggled around events in their life and taken time off of work to play these shows, which had been billed as opportunities for their careers. Opportunities that don't often present themselves for British rock bands. Also, it was a concern that this unwanted attention could draw criticism to these band members' judgments, something that could affect their personal lives negatively. As people began looking into who exactly Jered Threatin was, they discovered that almost everything about him was a lie. He had no record deal, no promotion agency, no big push. In fact, he had about 43 monthly listeners on Spotify, which, when compared to even struggling rock bands, is paltry in comparison. In response, he began trying to cover up his past, deleting social media accounts and YouTube videos wholesale. He tried to wipe away any trace of his origins that he had left behind, hoping to delay the inevitable, the internet sensation that this had already become. As Jered tried to cover up his identity and why he had gone through with the decision to lie to so many, stories about him spread throughout music websites, Metal Sucks and NME among others, eventually ending up on more mainstream entertainment news sites, AV Club, Variety, even BBC News. In the days after this story broke, thousands of people across the world were wondering, why had one man decided to do this? This was surely a losing venture, as he had conceivably lost thousands of dollars in setting up this tour, a tour that nobody came to see. More importantly, how had he managed to fool so many people along the way? Stage Right Bookings was the promotion agency that had hired the opening acts for the tour, as well as arranging the tour dates and corresponding with the venues. Stage Right Bookings had a legitimate-looking website, which included artist photos and brief bio sections, which detailed their individual musical histories. It had the type of veneer that looked good on a surface level, but just a little bit of digging would discover that all of these musical profiles were fake. Stock photos, with names that were seemingly drawn from a character naming generator. Because of this legit-looking website, venues just assumed that Stage Right Bookings was a promoter that they had never personally done business with before. Each of the venues were contacted by an individual named Casey Marshall, who offered to pay a flat fee for the venues to host these tour dates. Just like I explained earlier, this was an easy decision for the venues to make. They simply had to rent out their facility for the tour dates, and the promoter would then be responsible for selling and marketing the shows. However, this assumed that the shows were legitimate, as each venue had employees that had to be staffed on the night in question, such as security, bartenders, etc. This means that whoever Casey Marshall was offering to pay hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars for Threatin to play each night to absolutely nobody. This would lead one to guess that Threatin might have also been duped by this promoter, but we can understandably assume otherwise, because Stage Right Bookings seemed to have a close relationship with the quote-unquote record label that Threatin was signed to. Superlative Music Recordings was the fake record label created by Jered Threatin, whose talent roster included the same names as Stage Right Bookings. The website for Superlative Music Recordings, SMR, as it called itself, included a somewhat detailed history going back to the 1960s, but all of the executive names were either outright fabrications or famous names stolen to add validity to this fabrication. So not only had Jered Threatin created an entire promoter out of thin air, but he had essentially faked an entire side of the music business in an effort to make his band seem legitimate. In essence, he had paid thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars, to play Rockstar. Following the release of this story to the worldwide press, Threatin canceled the rest of their tour dates. They had last played on November 8th in Birmingham, but had to shutter the rest of the 4 dates because of this overwhelmingly negative press. This decision was actually criticized by Patrice Lovelace, the promotions assistant for the Underworld venue in London, who had to deal with Threatin's antics just a week or so earlier. He stated about Threatin's decision to cancel their remaining dates, quote, "He's wasted an opportunity and I don't think he should have canceled those last shows because I think they would have done quite well. I don't know what his point was. I thought he wanted fame, and he's famous now." The decision to cancel the rest of the remaining tour dates was due primarily to the fact that the entire backing band had made the decision to quit the tour as soon as they were made aware of this news.
Yeah, then we got to Belfast. We drove up to Scotland the next day, took the ferry over. Everything was fine. And Jared and Kelsey went to go check into the house that they rented while 3 of us stayed behind in the van. And that's when Dane brought it to our attention. He basically said, I've got to show you guys something and we need to keep this on the down low. And then he showed us the first article that broke out, and it just shocked us, completely shocked us. We didn't know what to say. I mean, it's just that initial feeling when your gut just totally sinks and, you know, you get like these butterflies in your stomach and you're like, oh my God, what's going on? And I generally like to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. And, cause it's online, and nowadays the internet is full of people who make things up. And so you want to at least give us the benefit of the doubt before making any assumptions. And, so I said, okay, we'll see where this goes. And over the next couple of hours, we're just relaxing at the house, and I'm scrolling online, scrolling through Facebook, and I started seeing the article appearing everywhere. And yeah, then I did a search and a ton of articles popped up, and I said, oh my God, this is blowing up. It's blowing up huge, and this isn't good. So Dane, Gavin, and I were all texting each other, trying to figure out what to do. Jared was up in his room. I don't know what he was doing up there. And then, basically Dane and I basically came to the decision that we're going to leave. We don't want to be a part of this. We don't want to be associated with this. This isn't what we signed up for.
Up until then, they had no idea that their frontman, a talented musician in his own right, had basically dreamed up their entire tour in an effort to play rockstar. Bassist Gavin Carney was the one who first broached the idea to Jered, telling them that they needed to stop playing shows. Later that day, guitarist Joe Prunera and drummer Dane Davis both made the decision to leave the tour entirely, attempting to book flights back home. Gavin, the bassist, was stuck with Jared and his wife for the remainder of the tour. As he did not have the resources available to book an early flight home, he would have to stick out the remainder of the trip, where accommodations had already been made, and a plane ticket had already been purchased to fly him back to the States from Germany. All 3 members of Jered's backing band, guitarist Joe Prunera, bassist Gavin Carney, and drummer Dane Davis, were just regular working man musicians that had been drawn into the story due to no fault of their own. Joe and Dane lived in Las Vegas, while Gavin lived in Southern California. All 3 had been contacted through email by a woman named Lisa Golding, who claimed to be an artist manager at Aligned Artist Management in Beverly Hills, California. She asked all 3 to travel to Los Angeles to audition for an up-and-coming hard rock band that was planning a European tour. Dream come true, right? In most cases, that would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. However, like most things tied to Jered Threatin, this was not all it cracked up to be. All 3 musicians only ever spoke to this Lisa Golding by telephone, arranging for an audition to take place. They also spoke to a male acquaintance of Lisa's, but they never met or saw these 2 individuals face to face. Many have theorized that they might have even been Jared and Kelsey, his wife. When the musicians arrived in Los Angeles, they met Jared and Kelsey and auditioned for the spots in Jared's band. Shortly thereafter, they were contacted and told that they had landed the gig and needed to start rehearsals for the upcoming fall tour. These rehearsals lasted weeks, if not months, with Joe Prunera and Dane Davis traveling back and forth between Las Vegas and Los Angeles on their own dime. These rehearsals lasted entire weekends, with Joe having to spend an extensive amount of time with Jared himself, going over the guitar parts. Joe says that he didn't really get any weird vibes from Jared, thinking him to be a pretty normal, quiet guy. He apparently never spoke much about himself, simply stating that he was from the Midwest, and he tried to keep conversations focused on the music. For the entire week before departing for Europe, the band stayed at Jared's home about an hour outside of Los Angeles, engaging in a week-long rehearsal of the set. They did not sign any type of contract before flying overseas, which isn't too uncommon in the music industry. Instead, trying to see this as a good opportunity to not only get touring experience, but to also see the world. After all, they had been told that all expenses would be paid, including not only travel and lodging, but also their food. Each member had been told that they would be paid $300 for the tour, but the day before flying over to Europe, were told that this $300 was their food stipend. Obviously, this shocked the three of them, who were not exactly looking for a huge payday, but had already dedicated weeks, if not months of their lives, to this tour. Being told that they would earn nothing at the last minute was a huge slap in the face. The $300 that they had been paid for food ran out pretty quickly, and the band members had to begin going out of pocket for their food and living expenses. To make matters even more complicated, the band members were surprised to learn that Kelsey, Jared's wife, would be traveling with them as their tour manager. Oftentimes, bands try to keep relatives and spouses out of business matters, so this was a bit odd. Upon landing, the band discovered that the accommodations, while not exactly first class, were not terrible.
They rented a Mercedes Sprinter van, which, they rented it from a touring company. So basically, it seated 9. There were basically the front, the front seats, and then there were 2 rows of 3, I guess, bucket type seats, which are very uncomfortable, by the way. And so his wife Kelsey did all the driving. We stayed in apartments or apartment hotels, which I guess are pretty popular over there. It's, it's basically run like a hotel, but instead of individual rooms, it's like furnished 2-bedroom apartments. So we stayed at those types of places. I think, what was it, in Bristol? Yeah, it was in Bristol. They rented a mobile home, a manufactured home, and then in Ireland, they rented out an actual house, a 3-bedroom house for us. And, basically Jared and Kelsey would have the master bedroom. 2 of us would share the 2nd bedroom, and then someone would be on the couch, in the living room there. And, some of the places were very comfortable. I know there was one house one apartment in, Newcastle that was had no heat or no hot water, so that was interesting.
Jared and Kelsey did not seem to drink any alcohol or do any drugs, instead mostly keeping to themselves in one room while the other 3 band members shared another room. However, while in Europe, they seemed to express odd controlling behavior at times, such as insisting knowing where all the other band members were at all times. When I asked Joe if this was common from either a band leader or a tour manager, he responded pretty bluntly.
Usually, I'm used to being treated like an adult and saying, okay, be at the venue at this time, make sure you're there, and, or, hey, we're going to run through the set at this time, make sure you're there for that, and, otherwise just, keep in touch. But yeah, not like that. It kind of felt like we were looked upon as being treated like little kids, really.
Throughout the tour, these 3 band members realized that something was a bit odd about Jared and his wife, Kelsey. They thought that the two expressed weird behaviors at times, but it was incredibly strange that absolutely nobody was showing up to their live shows. It wasn't until they got to Belfast that the hoax began to unravel, and news of Jared's bizarre scheme hit music websites. Jared claimed, for a time, that he had also been duped by their promoter, and insisted that this was all a big misunderstanding. However, the more that he insisted, the more that this claim began to take on water.
Jared came downstairs and was kind of freaking out, asking if anybody had contacted us, and we said, well, no, but we did see the articles, and we have been reading up online, and, at that point, he just went into how he's the victim, he's being targeted, the promoter's fault that they didn't do their job, he's the easy target because it's his name on the bill, and he's the face of everything, and, he basically went off on that for probably about at least half hour to an hour. And then he kind of finally asked, he's like, I don't even know what we should do. And then that's when Gavin spoke up and said, yeah, we should not be playing shows anymore. This isn't good. And, I chimed in and said, yeah, that's a media frenzy right now. If you keep going, it's going to get worse. So then he kind of went back off on, how he's the victim here. And then he circled back around and said, I don't know what we should do. And we both said, dude, the tour's over at this point. There's no sense in carrying on.
Despite claiming that this had all happened because of a bogus manager and a fake promoter, it had become evident to Joe, Gavin, and Dane that something was wrong with Jared. A few days after returning home, drummer Dane Davis made a public statement on his Facebook account about the entire ordeal.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to give you an update on what's going on with me and the rest of the hired band for the Threatin tour. By now, you probably have heard what's going on with everything. It was shocking to find all this out on Friday. As of Friday, Joe, Gavin, and myself, we left the tour. I'm currently staying in Ireland with family just until I can get back and get a ticket home to Vegas. Joe is in Vegas right now. He already flew back. He was able to get a ticket home. Gavin is staying with Jared just so he can get the originally scheduled ticket that was supposed to get us all home. So he'll be heading back on the original scheduled flight. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's reached out to us, and every person working at the venue, the staff, all the venues, for being very professional, and just for giving the band the opportunity. But none of this should have happened, and I just want first and foremost to let everyone know that Joe, Gavin, and I, we had no idea. We were blindsided by everything that came up on Friday. And Joe and Gavin are great people, very talented musicians, and it's shocking, and we're trying to wrap our heads around what happened. But thank you to everyone who's reached out to support us, who's tried to make sure that we're okay to get home and that we're okay financially. It's been incredible. Like, I can't thank you guys enough for that. But I want to give you this update to let you know that not to worry. We're all safe. We're all okay to get home. We've made arrangements, and just thank you. And I know that there's a lot of questions right now. I myself have questions. I honestly, it's yeah, it's such a surreal, like, strange thing that has happened with this tour. And yeah, I just want to let you guys know I really appreciate everyone who's been supportive, and everyone who worked hard on this tour, and all the bands. Thank you for playing with us. We played with some incredible bands, and no one deserved what happened. So I just want to say thanks, like, for for everyone's concern, and for everyone's help throughout this, and for everyone who let us know what was going on Friday, and was just, like, stuck with us, and stuck by us to try and help us out as much as they could. So thank you. There will be more updates about everything that's going on. But yeah, for now, I just wanted to let everyone know not to worry. We're all good. But yeah, thank you guys.
A couple of days passed, in which the world continued to learn about this bizarre story that was unfolding in real time. Finally, on November 14th, 2018, Jered Threatin broke his silence about the entire ordeal in a comment that seemed to deflect all blame. Taking to Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, he posted, "What is fake news? I turned an empty room into an international headline. If you are reading this, you are part of the illusion." Jered also included the following hashtags: marketing, psychology, social media, fake news, threaten, breaking the world, and music industry, while making sure to tag the publications that had detailed his story in the preceding days. This seemed to be an attempt to paint himself as a performance artist, a la Andy Kaufman. However, he ended up coming across more Tommy Wiseau-esque, the director of the cult film The Room, who also seemed to have no concept of self-awareness. This was likely a statement meant to salvage what little remained of Jered's reputation, but the damage had already been done. Those that had lived through the ordeal were not amused by Jered's comment, which seemed tone-deaf and insensitive. Among those that were displeased was Joe Prunera, the guitarist that had lived through the botched tour alongside Jered.
I saw that, and I think the only thing I could say for about 20 minutes was just wow. You would hope that, maybe he would have taken the high road on it, but the way I read it, he was basically just not owning up to it, and I thought it was handled very, very poor, especially, you've had 3 or 4 days to come up with a statement, and that was the best, you could come up with. I thought it was very, very poor on his end there.
One of the contributing factors to Jered's excuse falling flat was his true identity becoming public knowledge just an hour or two before his comment. The man calling himself Jered Threatin is actually a 29-year-old named Jared Eames, who had been born and raised in Moverly, Missouri, a small town in the middle of the state. He and his wife, Kelsey Page, have been married for around 8 years, as of July 31st, 2018, and live in Hesperia, California, about 80 miles northeast of Los Angeles. This is according to Kelsey's personal social media accounts, which contained several pictures of the two, and were made private at the same time this hoax became public knowledge. Jared Eames, who would later rebrand himself under the name Jered Threatin, had a prior musical history. Alongside his brother, Scott, he had founded a blackened death metal band named Satith in the mid-2000s. Jered and Scott seemed to be the only permanent members of Satith, with the band earning followers throughout the Midwest during its short lifespan. Satith actually opened for some pretty prominent metal groups, such as Arsis, A Life Once Lost, The Black Dahlia Murder, The Faceless, Vital Remains, and even death metal legends Cannibal Corpse. They would release 2 EPs, Decaying Heads of the Holy in 2007 and Revive the Blasphemy in 2010, with some of their bandmates going on to join groups such as Cradle of Filth, Cryptic Winter, Thy Antichrist, and Dying Fetus. Satith earned Jered a half-decent reputation as a bass player, and he had actually joined lauded black metal band Abigail Williams for a short time in 2010. Ken Sorceron, the frontman of this group, later went to social media to describe Jered's tenure in the band as, quote, like a week. After the short-lived gig in Abigail Williams, Jered turned his attention back to Satith, announcing in November of 2010 that the band had signed a record deal with Rising Records, a UK-based label. However, this alleged record deal would not result in any more material being released by the band, and following a random show in Puerto Rico, footage of which you could find online, Satith seemed to fade into oblivion. A short time after this, in 2012, Jered seemed to cut off contact with all of his friends and family in the Midwest and moved out to Los Angeles. In the years since, as Jered has brought his persona Jered Threatin to realization, his father, Jared Eames, has continued to follow from afar. On many of Threatin's social media pages, Jerry has been leaving comments asking for either Jered or Kelsey, Jered's wife, to contact him. It's actually pretty heartbreaking, especially when you consider the statement released by Jered's brother and former bandmate, Scott. Scott Eames, who played with Jered in Satith, has since gone on to have a successful musical career of his own. He currently plays in the band Thy Antichrist, and has pursued his own creative venture in the band Navalra. On November 14th, 2018, the same day that Jered released his half-hearted public comment about fake news, Scott released a statement regarding his brother's actions. Quote, "All I can say is I'm disappointed in the choices my brother has made, with the current news shedding light on his real identity and our relation, and that we did have a band together in the past. I have to actively disassociate myself with his current actions. It is my opinion that with the same amount of effort and money, of which I'm sure he's borrowed a lot, there's no doubt in my mind, with his talent he could have done something in a legitimate and respectable manner. Instead, he's gone the route of manipulation and deceit. While he may try to spin all this as an elaborate hoax of sorts, I can assure you, knowing my brother, that this indeed was a failed attempt at entering the music industry. I've not spoken to Jered since 2012. It's true that my brother and I had a somewhat successful regional band together, but we split up, mostly, due to Jered wanting to take things in the direction you all see before you. I, personally, have no tolerance for these kinds of antics. In contrast, I do things in a legitimate way. The opportunities I have had has been a product of hard work and dedication, and not through any means of misconception or deceit. It is my goal with this statement not to disown my brother, but to disassociate and express my detest for his recent actions in the music industry. This bizarre scheme orchestrated by Jared Eames, who calls himself Jered Threatin, has left many confused people in its wake. In addition to the thousands, if not millions, that have followed the story from afar, there are the venue owners and managers, who wasted nights of their life opening up their venues for Jered to play his music to absolutely nobody. Then there are the opening bands, that were offered an opportunity to display their talents in front of thousands, but ended up playing for a smattering of random guests they invited. All of these bands, hardworking blue-collar bands with a small presence, hoping to make it big, took time out of their lives to prepare for the gig, took time out of their jobs and lives to make it happen, and then traveled to the venue on their own dime. Then there are the members of Jered's band, Joe, Gavin, and Dane, who spent countless hours of their lives preparing for this tour. using vacation time to get away from their jobs because they had been promised an all-expenses-paid tour of Europe. In the end, they were able to display their talent in front of an absentee crowd, and are leaving the tour having lost several hundreds or thousands of dollars of their own. Above all, this is the story of a man who pursued fame at all cost. It is unknown what his true motivation was, whether he was desperate to feel famous, or if he defrauded dozens in an attempt to put on a performance mocking the music industry. Regardless, Jared Eames was willing to spend thousands of dollars on a rockstar vacation of Europe, and he has inadvertently turned himself into a senseless joke. At the end of the day, we need to remember that scammers like Jared Eames, Jered Threatin, if he wishes to continue using that name, do not deserve our respect or our support. Those that do include the musicians that lived up to their word and played out their shows, even though the gig itself was a total disaster. Among these bands are Camino, an opening band that was privy to the disaster known as Threatin. Despite this odd setback, which may end up being a footnote on their Wikipedia page, they still have high hopes for the future, and have a lot of interesting things in the horizon.
We've, as you said, we've got a couple of shows in December. We're playing up in Shropshire at a place called Whitchurch, Percy's in Whitchurch, and in Cheltenham, which isn't too far from our hometown of Bristol, at the Cotswold Inn. That should see us through to the end of 2018, and then, as you say, the EP is going to be the next sort of big coming thing. We've recorded 4 tracks. We're working currently on plans for our music videos. The last music video we did from our previous EP for a song called Aconite, we actually sort of shot entirely ourselves in my garage, sort of hanging black bed sheets up on the wall and with spotlights attached to the end of mic stands and things like that. And it was really lo-fi and DIY, but we're kind of working on a way of keeping that kind of production value within the band itself and kind of that sort of thing. So a lot of work in progress, but we're really happy with the EP itself. It takes the music to almost another direction along the same theme of Aconite. It's a 4-track, and we're really looking forward to people hearing it. So I'm hoping that it's going to drop in sort of the first 3 months, I would have hoped, of next year.
Also, we may perhaps see the band members of Threatin, minus Jared himself, team up in the future. Joe discussed his own musical future, as well as his thoughts about what this ordeal has taught him.
Well, when Dane gets back into town, he and I are going to get together and check out each other's music and see if there's, anything there that we could possibly form a group over. Worst case scenario, if there's not, we'll at least help each other out however we can, but it would be great to form a group with Dane. Before this, I was recording music and slowly releasing it. I have one song I released on YouTube called The Awakening, and I had started just recording several of my other songs. I've been also taking lessons from Scott Van Zen, who's an amazing guitar teacher, and so my definitive immediate plans are to finish recording the songs, put a band together, and just get back on stage and see how far, take it as far as I can. If there's other opportunities that come along, I'm always open and welcome to them. And, the ultimate goal is to just be on stage performing. So, keep plugging away with my own music and then, just get back out there as soon as possible. I like to look at it as, all right, one, this is what not to do, especially on tour or in a band or anything like that. But two, I'm chalking it up to a crazy tour story, and I'm really looking forward to the future and what other opportunities might present themselves, and just to really get my own music together, get in a band and get back on stage, because that's ultimately what I love doing the most, performing on stage, and I can't wait to get back there. So I'm always trying to look forward and move forward and not dwell on anything, because when you keep dwelling on something, it just eats you away, and why do that to yourself? You're going to go through ups and downs with anything, but if you don't take that that risk, if you don't take that chance, you know, you're never gonna know for sure, and you're never gonna move forward. And yeah, it was pretty crappy in the moment, but there's gonna be some great opportunities that come out of this, and I'm just very excited, looking forward to the future to, you know, find out what those are.